Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 6th episode of Beyond Talking Points. I'm Matthew with my co-host Matt. We don't have as many stories to cover today as we usually do because Matt was traveling. So, but we have a good amount of material. I don't actually have much to say, so I'll just let him jump right into the first story.
Yeah, so let's just give a brief overview. We're going to cover three topics generally. We're going to talk a little bit about just the abortion debate in general, because there's been a lot going on the last month or so. Then we're going to cover an article from 2017 about Tulsi Gabbard that's just really interesting. I think interesting is the best word to describe it. And then we're going to talk a little bit. I don't know if you guys are following this, but there's been a little bit of a drama between Dave Rubin and Colette with the IDW, and they wrote a piece kind of negative, saying that they're more conservative. We watched a video by Roman Millennial where she talked about it, and we're going to comment on that a little bit. But to intro the first topic, the main reason I wanted to talk about this, we actually had planned on doing it a few weeks ago, is because I'm in Philadelphia, and there was this whole event here where Brian Sims is a representative of the PA House, and he ended up yelling at some protesters in his district in front of a Planned Parenthood, and the video completely blew up. So the video that blew up was three teenage girls with what I presume to be their mom praying outside of Planned Parenthood, and Brian Sims walks up to them, yells at them, tells them that what they're doing is racist, unchristian, and he offers, it's some like a Facebook Live or a Instagram Live, something like that. He offers $100 to anybody who can get their names and address, essentially, so he can dox them. So that wasn't a good look on him. Then when that video came out, there was another one where he did very similar things to an older woman. And this led to like a huge 1,000-person counter protest in the city. So that was a whole event. And then that spurred me on into wanting to talk about the issue, because I think the abortion issue is kind of ridiculous. I think it's two sides talking past each other. And then my co-host is going to talk a little bit about the laws that have just passed that have just taken this conversation to the national stage all of a sudden in like the last 2 weeks. So you can go ahead and talk about those a little bit.
Thank you. So Georgia and Alabama recently passed some legislation which would restrict abortion far more than already in those two states. To give a little background, both states were already pretty restricted generally. So in Georgia, if a woman is considering wanting to have an abortion, she is required to go to state-mandated counseling, where the counselor is supposed to discourage her from getting the abortion. And she's supposed to wait 24 hours before the procedure is actually done. And let's see. Parents of pregnant teens under the age of 18 must be notified before the abortion can occur, and it is no longer legal after 22 weeks. And now in Alabama, this is the context. This isn't the laws passed yet. In Alabama, let's see. Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm stuttering. As well as the state mandated counseling in Alabama, there's a 48-hour waiting period. The parent, if minors, the parent has to consent to minors. If a minor is wanting to get an abortion, the parents have to consent, and there are no abortions allowed after 21.6 weeks into the pregnancy. So the laws passed would sorry, I'm just peering over my notes here. I think it's in Georgia that it would be illegal after 6 weeks, completely illegal after 6 weeks. In Alabama, I think it's completely banned, except in the case of the woman's health. Now, the laws haven't been enacted yet, In Alabama, I think it's going to be going to go into effect in November, and in Georgia, it will go into effect in January of next year. So currently, the laws have not changed yet, but if the laws do change, or if these bills do go into effect, then it will certainly change. The bills are, though, in direct contrast or in direct conflict with the 1973 decision, the Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision. So that there will certainly be some people taking both states to court, and maybe they will not even be upheld. We'll see. Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I stuttered all that time.
No, that's fine. You did a good job laying out the situation before these new laws passed. You explained what the laws are, and you explained, kind of some of the implications of it. Well, as you're laying that out, it was striking me so much why I think this is a interesting conversation to have. I think it's simultaneously very complex and very simple. I think there's a lot of different things you can talk about. You can talk about the political implications when it comes to, say, like the Supreme Court. You can talk about the political rhetoric on both sides. You can talk about the actual issue at hand. So I think there's a lot of elements you can cover just on this one topic, which is more so than most topics. With a lot of topics, you can just point out this is the goal of the policy. Will this policy meet the goal? Do it, and here's the evidence for or against. This clearly isn't that kind of situation, which I think is why it ends up striking so much debate. And I think that's why it's a lot of just two sides talking past each other in kind of a meaningless flurry of rhetoric that is just heightened and it's not productive in any way. So I'm the resident libertarian, but typically the Libertarian Party is associated with, a Democrat on social issues. For short, when I was in high school, they called libertarians essentially Democrats on social issues, Republicans on economic issues. And I find that completely stupid because that misses the point of being a libertarian. It's just the general theory of small government. And then Democrats on social issues are generally for small government. But the case with abortion is, when you simplify it, the real difference is half of America thinks a fetus is essentially a human life worth protecting, and half doesn't. And if you don't, then why should abortion be illegal? And if it is, then there's no circumstance where abortion should really be legal. Even if you're a libertarian, if it's worth being protected, then obviously, even with small government, you'd be anti-abortion. So I don't even think it's like a libertarian government-sized conversation. So I just want to address that quickly because I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself as the libertarian on the show and then saying how I fall into it regardless of that. So I feel like, especially with what everybody's saying after these laws pass, people are just talking past each other. You turn on Saturday Night Live and a comedy show, and you get Leslie Jones yells about how men are trying to take over your bodies because they want to control you. And then Republicans talk about how the other side wants to murder babies. And it's just because they don't agree with the basic facts of the issue. Do you think yeah. Okay. So that's my initial take, and that's what drives me the most insane about the conversation.
So, before I proceed, I want to make sure I understand your position. Would you say on the you kind of feel as if the debate is a bit phony? You feel it's as if it's two people who can't have a reasonable discussion together, or two groups of people?
Yeah, it's just complete talking past each other. It's like they're unable to empathize with the other person's premises, and they both disagree on premises, so they assume malintent, right?
But what is your general take on abortion? Well,
so I think the question that should essentially decide where you fall is, should the life be protected? And the way I see it is, it has its own unique DNA. It's not an extension of the mother. It's a developing human just before coming through the birth canal. So it's like how an infant is on its stages of development into childhood. A fetus is just a human DNA, developing, but to the baby phases. It just hasn't gone through the birth canal yet. So I'm generally pro-life just because I see that as some sort of human, even though it technically hasn't been born yet. Yeah, that's where I end up standing.
I I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, I think, before after the previous show, how I'm not a huge fan of this topic, just because I agree with you that it's two sides who can't see eye to eye on anything because of the premises, because they disagree on the premises of the question. And I just find generally that these conversations end up being very emotional. Particularly, I have to say, with women who are pro-choice. I mean, there are some women in the family, in my family, who are pro-choice. And I feel like I can't even discuss the issue with them because, if you raise any question if you raise the life question at all, it doesn't even matter. Even if you're not saying that it's a life from the conception, even if you're saying more moderate, well, I would say it's a life up to wherever you draw the line. If you're not completely if you're not completely gun ho 100% of the time, this is my experience. I feel like they get very angry with you. Like, how dare you? How dare you tell me, what I should do or what women should do with their body? That is not a life. And sorry, go ahead.
No, like, I agree. I mean, I don't want to assume that there. I mean, I don't want to go down that line too much because then I don't want to accidentally imply that a pro-choice person can't have a valid position.
No.
It does quickly get very easily. It's such a personal issue. I mean, and it's such a gray area, and I don't think people like to even think about it a lot of the time. But it's also that I'm conflicted because in general, I like to downplay rhetoric. I don't think rhetoric is actually that important in the sense that, like, I don't think a politician saying something heated is actually likely to influence opinion. On the other hand, the thoughts on abortion are generally just both so siloed that it's one of the few times where I actually think that might be the case, because the side of pro-choice is so heavily in the camp of this is clearly a right to my body. And it seems like that every time I hear somebody try to defend that position, I'm not convinced by it. And then it's all, but once you go into the language of rights, then it's really hard to argue with somebody, which is why it's hard to convince me on stuff when we were discussing and I'm a libertarian and I'm like, well, yeah, but this is my right to my income. It's hard to persuade people once they think of things as rights. So I think they're really convinced on that way. And if your mindset is it's not a baby, it's not a human, so I can do whatever I want, then it's very easy to stay in that side and not even empathize and to assume, because it's an intuition, right? They have this strong intuition that, like, you don't have any memories from before you're born. You're not really a person. And that's like this heightened intuition. And they can't even empathize with the pro-choice part, the pro-life people who are just like, you're baby killers. So they assume that when they get called baby killers, the other people are just dishonest and they want to control them. And it's an interesting narrative that I don't see any real evidence for, but I hear it over and over again. So it sounds like you're moderately pro-life. That's what I'm hearing.
This might sound like a cop-out, and I'll try my best not to make it sound like a cop-out. But I think you could really put me in either category with caveats. So you could really call me a pro-choicer with caveats or a pro-lifer with caveats. I think it is a very I'm very conflicted on the issue, because while I do think I'm not I don't really believe in the soul or in life after death or anything like that. So I believe we're material beings, and obviously we were all fetuses once. we were all everyone that's born was once a fetus that developed to conception. So I certainly do believe that the life question does come into play. On the other hand, I don't think we can completely ban abortion, because I think in certain instances it's kind of like a safeguard. I mean, you don't want to have to use the safeguard. I mean, there are probably some radical feminists who might say, "Oh yeah, I'm glad I want to get an abortion."
Well, you
But
have to shout your abortion people.
yeah,
You
yeah.
scream that
But
they're
I
the
think
1 in 5. Yeah.
I think most people would say, if in a perfect world, abortion would not be necessary. I agree with this. I do think in certain circumstances, it is better than the alternative. And I'll say one more thing. I think it was an interview with the Australian philosopher Peter Singer. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a
hardcore
he's mainly known for
consequentialist.
he's
And
mainly known
effective altruism, right?
Yeah, he's mainly known for his animal advocating for animal rights. He's a vegan, against all that stuff. So I can't. Obviously I can't. I don't have the quote pulled up here, but he said something as if equal rights does not mean equal consideration. Something to that effect. And I would say, generally speaking, I think I agree with that. I think, and my position on abortion, I guess, if I had to lay it out, is pretty much this. In the first trimester, I think it should almost, pretty much free ride or free abortion or pretty. I feel like I'm really sorry. I'm a lot going on. To sum up my position on abortion, it is, pretty much abortion all the way in the first trimester. In the second trimester, some restrictions. In the third trimester, even further restrictions. That's my position, generally.
Okay, so you reminded me of a few things in that whole thing. So one, when you brought up some abstract philosophical things for a moment, one thing that I hate about the abortion discussion is it's so hard to be. I would consider myself an agnostic. I'm not confident enough to be an atheist or a deist. I don't have intrinsic beliefs, so I've never fallen into any I don't believe in anything. Let's just put it that way. But I'm not going to take a stand like an atheist would. I hate how this whole debate is predicated around religion, because when you look at the pro-life side, it's so heavily dominated by religious voices. And I think the case for being pro-life is completely rational. I don't think you need to cite anything. I don't think you need to invoke the sanctity of life. Like, I understand that argument if you think that you have to derive principles such as life has value from the Bible. If you don't believe that without the Bible, then it's like, okay, then you do need to cite religion. But we're at a point where most people take that for granted in a heavily secular society. Like, murder is illegal, so we've already agreed that life to some extent is somewhat sacred, right? I think that's just generally agreed upon even by secular folks. So I think if you start with that premise, that's really the only religious premise you need. Anything else is just over the top. You don't have to talk about how life is sacred to know that, it's like if you think this fetus is its own individual and it's a stage of development and it's a human with human DNA and it's growing, I don't think you need to cite any biblical text for that to matter. So I really hate that. As I mentioned, that whole protest was in Philadelphia, the counter protests. And I consider myself very strongly pro-life. And I considered going to it. But then when I watched the coverage, there were people who I like and I think have interesting voices that were going to it. Yet I knew that it was going to be overwhelmingly religious. And I knew I would not fit in with the crowd. And that's just how the debate kind of is. I don't think there's any real reason for that. The next point I kind of wanted to say was I used to be very moderate. I used to have a lot of respect for moderate positions, and I don't really have respect for moderate positions. I'm not trying to be edgy and controversial. It's just I think it's one of those things where you have to pinpoint what makes the fetus need to be protected, and once you start making the practical case, if you recall through the last 5 episodes of the show, I've kind of mentioned that I'm a little bit of a Kantian in how I frame political choices, where it's I understand the end is good, But if the means are bad, then I don't like it. And I understand that women are in horrible situations where they don't want to have a kid, and it's terrible for them to have a kid, and they don't want to be pregnant for 9 months and then have to care for a kid. And it's like, but I don't think the answer to that, based on my premises that I'm working with, is abortion is okay, even if it's 6 weeks in. Now, like, I would cede, the morning after pill for, for fetuses that have already been conceived, but have just been conceived, and like rape and incest. I would cede all those like right away. Like, okay, take those if we make the rest illegal. Like, I'm not going to take a stand over those ones like some people do. But like first trimester, like 2 months in, it's like, like I understand why, if you make the argument as a consequentialist, it makes sense. But based on my premises, I can't accept that as an ethical policy. But in general, you generally are more of a consequentialist in how you lay out policies. So it kind of, I understand why you'd come to that perspective. I just don't think I could back it. I think I had a third thought, but I lost it at some point in that rant. Also, Peter Singer, I definitely have like 3 of his audiobooks that I'm going to check out from my Philadelphia library. I have them already. Animal Liberation, and there's a couple others. I'm excited to dig into his stuff. But he famously said something, infamously said something where he personally doesn't see much of a distinction between infanticide and abortion. He just kind of doesn't care because his framework is very consequentialist. So you might not want to take that perspective, because that's kind of hard to defend, in my opinion.
Well, obviously we'd have to dive deeper into into Singer's work, which I don't think we're going to in this one episode.
We're definitely not.
Obviously, with everyone, I agree with some things he says. I disagree with some things he says, and I agree. This debate should not have to be religious. And I know. Again, I understand why people think that that's a cop-out, that that's not a defensible position, being a moderate. I mean, I understand. And I just, I think in some issues it is warranted. And on other issues, I just think it's not warranted. Because I don't think there is always a clear black and white, yay, nay, yay versus nay, right versus wrong answer. And I think abortion, as we both have conceded, is a very gray area where where do you draw the line of life? Where do you draw the line of the woman's body, or the woman's right to privacy, or the right to health care? So
okay, I have a last thought based on that before we move on. Because that is a very common pro-choice type argument. It's like, it is sketchy moral territory, so leave it up to the mother. Is kind of a
no. I didn't actually say that, but okay.
Okay. It just sounded similar to a sentiment I hear a lot, and I don't like that sentiment. So that's why. I don't
think. No. Well, let me clarify then, just
okay.
To be clear. I don't think. There are people who say, this is a woman's issue. I don't agree with that. It's a human issue. I think, despite the fact that men will never have to get abortions, I think men certainly can have a stake in the game. And it's not always because the patriarchy.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't think it's not about I don't think it's a woman's issue, and I don't think we should leave it up to the woman. I guess if I'm okay with abortion in some respects, it probably would be more the consequentialist, more because of the outcome, rather than saying, oh, I love abortion.
Okay. So the last thought before I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm just going to make an unrelated thought on this. The consequentialist arguments, I doubled down on how Kantian I am, because I've heard so many of them, like that there was that very popular econ book, Freakonomics, that it led to a whole NPR radio show that's had like 1,000 episodes. And in the first Freakonomics book, there's a whole study essentially about the crime wave. And the author implies that the crime wave, the reason why crime dropped off, is actually because of the timing of Roe v. Wade, and a lot of young people who would have been born in bad situations didn't grow up right at that age range where they would have grown up, because they were probably aborted because their parents were single mothers or in very bad situations. And there's actually a good case for that. So consequentialists could cite that in favor of abortion. It's like, well, a lot of these kids are born into bad situations, are more likely to become criminals, are more likely to have harder lives. And I hear that and I'm like, yeah, that would really suck. I feel a lot of empathy for the woman, feel a lot of empathy for the kids, but I don't think it means you kill a fetus in the womb. I don't think that's the solution. And I think that's what a lot of pro-lifers hear when they hear the consequentialist take. They're like, okay, I understand. We can work with all those things. We can work with the unintended consequences after we see that it's not worth killing the fetus. But yeah, I totally get your perspective. I understand. It makes sense with your framework you're working with. I'm working with a different framework, and we've kind of worked through that a lot. So yeah, okay. So let's move on to talk a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard. I think you're gonna have a lot more thoughts on this because you, I think in our first episode, or maybe it was just us talking. It was just us talking the first time we got to know each other. You specifically pointed out Tulsi as a girl you were a fan of. And then we got this article all about her coming from a really, it's the left attacking the left, because it's another piece from Jacobinmag, which is the one from which is the Nietzsche article that we did.
I think it's a Marxist website.
Yeah. So do you want to break down this hit piece, because it's fascinating?
Sure. I will say though, through all these, or at least these last two stories we covered, there was one main takeaway, especially with this Gabbard piece. It is very in depth. There's a lot of areas we could go into. It is, as I say, it's on the Jacobin website. It's titled. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I heard some feedback in the microphone. All right, it's titled "Tulsi Gabbard is Not Your Friend." It's subtitled "Tulsi Gabbard is hailed as a progressive champion, but her views on Islam and support for far right leaders suggest otherwise." So right off the bat, you can tell, as you say, this is a left attacking the left issue. And this is actually an issue I see a lot on the left. People on the left are never left enough for other people on the left. You're always, secretly in league with the fascists and the conservatives if you don't believe this, that, or the other thing. And so that just, really gets under my skin. Because, well, especially when they start talking about the foreign policy, her foreign policy, because it starts talking about, oh, well, she supports this government, or she had a conversation with this leader who, oppressed his people in this respect, and the world, the world is a tricky place. We're not always going to be able to associate with angels, unfortunately. Maybe in a perfect world, all the good guys, and you would only have to associate with good people or with healthy people or constructive people. And that's just not how it works. But actually, the main reason I wanted to bring up this article was the topic of Islam. So the main argument in the article involving Islam is that she is Islamophobic. That she's racist against Muslims. I think it talks about her. I think she made the point a while back that that immigration from certain countries, predominantly Islamic countries, should be curtailed. And of course, she's I should say, if you don't know, she's Hindu. She believes in Hinduism, and Hindus and Muslims have a bad history. But really, I'm using this kind of as a springboard to attack the idea of Islamophobia, because I'm just really sick and tired of this term. I've been called Islamophobic quite a few times, actually, in conversations with people on the left. It really gets under my skin, because I think we're not allowing ourselves to criticize aspects of Islam, because we're equating it with we're equating criticism with Islam with racism, and we're saying, did you criticize Islam on, for this or that? Okay, well, that means, you're racist, that you hate Arab people. And that is clearly not the case. I mean, you can make criticisms of Islam without being a racist. In fact, I would say it's very easy to make criticisms of Islam without being racist. And it just so, we don't have to go too deep into, the question of, are all religions equal? But I think it's at this time in history, at least, globally speaking, what religion is causing the most chaos? It's Islam. and I think we have to point that out, and I think Gabbard does. She's one of the few progressives who do, and I will certainly stand by her in that respect. I don't. Again, I'm not her, so obviously I'm not going to agree with her on every single issue. And there are other aspects of this article that maybe I'd agree with the writer a bit more. I'm not sure. Gabbard might be a bit weak on foreign policy. I have to do more research to give a firm grasp on that. But that's really the main thrust of what I wanted to talk about.
Okay. So, but before I comment on it, I do want to point out that in like the last 5 minutes, right when you started talking, since I live in Philadelphia and the weather's stupid, it's pouring and thunderstorms out all of a sudden. So if you hear just thunder, booming, just ignore it. I'm fine. I'm inside. I'm good. Okay. So I'm just going to jump on the Islamophobia part. I don't need to talk about the rest of the piece. The real tension in the talk about Islamic terrorism is there's a large amount of people who think it's because of the ideology of Islam and the strict reading of it, and then what follows from a strict reading of it. And then there's a lot of people who essentially say terrorists do what they do because of what we do to them, and then they see the carnage and then they retaliate. So this magazine clearly only buys that second view as legitimate. They only think the issue is we show up there, they're upset, which creates lifelong terrorists that want to destroy our nation because we've wreaked carnage in their country.
It's ideology versus foreign policy, basically.
So the thing is, I get kind of annoyed because I think both things are clearly at play. Like, yeah, if a lot of innocent people get killed when we drop missiles in the Middle East. So if somebody knows that a family they knew, or maybe a member of their family, got killed because of a U.S. bomb, then they're more likely to buy into an ideology that villainizes the U.S. and Western culture and wants to attack it. Like, hey, that makes plenty of sense. I buy that theory. That's reasonable. So the thing is, if you acknowledge that there are things in Islam itself that what's the word for it? Heighten this radicalization and aggression, or things that can easily be cited to promote terrorist activity, that's when you get called Islamophobic. And it's clearly unfair. There's that famous Sam Harris on Bill Maher when he's talking to what celebrity was that? God, who was
Ben
it?
Affleck.
Yeah, Ben Affleck. And Ben Affleck just is calling Sam Harris all these names. And I've read
and Bill Maher.
Yeah. And I've been following Sam Harris for a couple years, and I read what was his first book? His first book was crap.
Was that The End of Faith or The Letter to a Christian Nation?
I think it was The End of Faith. I've read both those, but in The End of Faith, I'm pretty sure it's that book. There is a poll that is disturbing, and it polls a bunch of people who believe believe in the Islamic religion, and it's in different countries, what percentage of those people believed in suicide bombings to kill innocent people in defense of their religion. And the numbers were astonishingly high in some countries, and even in some countries where it was like 20% or 15%, those are still big numbers when it comes to, straight up saying you're willing to kill innocent people in defense of your religion. So that's terrifying, and it seems like ideology is somewhat in play. And I don't blame Tulsi for calling that out. I definitely didn't expect you to take this route off the article. I thought you were going to defend her being an anti-interventionist more, because this article attacks her cred there. But yeah, I think I think people get the Islam issue wrong. But here's the thing. You sound more strongly anti-Islam than I am. If you eradicated Islam from our world, I don't think the Middle East oppression would suddenly disappear. I think Islam is used as a weapon to perpetuate, like patriarchy is actually a fitting word in the Middle East, where men literally dominate their wives. So I think that there is a patriarchy there, and I think they weaponize their religion and read it in the strictest sense to reinforce that for decades and decades through different leadership and so forth, and to get people to buy into their stuff. But do I think that without the religion, this wouldn't happen? No. Like, I don't believe in secular utopias, right? I don't think all evil stems from religion. I think there's just some evil in some people. And I think there are plenty of dominant evil-doing people, probably in countries in Africa. There's probably some dictators there that are relatively secular, that don't cite a religion to dominate people. So I don't think that would cure all the ills, but I definitely think there's some sort of relationship between Islam.
Can I jump in here for a moment?
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure there's really a single word of that I disagree with. I guess let me take a bit more nuanced position when I'm talking about Islam. Well, I should say that I am an agnostic atheist. I know people say that's a contradiction in terms, but it's not, and I can go into that maybe at another date. And I've also been very influenced by the new atheist movement. So I guess I should say that is my background in intellectually in this arena. Do I think that Islam needs to be eradicated? No, I do not. Do I think it can be eradicated? No, I do not. I do think religion is an evil on this earth, and I do think religion causes a heck of a lot of damage. But I think, and I think probably quite several new atheists, at least Christopher Hitchens, I know, would agree with this. I think it's just a part of the human personality. I don't think religion, unless we change human nature, which I'm very skeptical of, I don't think religion will ever go away. And so I suppose I take maybe a bit of a pragmatic point on this. I do think that our goal should be to empower the moderates of Islam, because I think generally speaking, not completely, but generally speaking, the moderates of Judaism and Christianity have won, at least in the United States and Europe. It might be a bit different in other places on the planet, but I think generally speaking, the moderates of those two religions have dominated, and I think we just need to, give Islam a little push intellectually. I mean, we need. That's what I mean by, I think we should talk about this issue so we can help them. I think this will, if and when reform comes to Islam, and I think it can come, it will probably come from the inside. I don't think, you're not from an Islamic culture, neither am I. So I don't think we have as much control over that culture. But yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't say I'm anti all religions, but I would not go so far as to say that, we have to destroy Islam.
So this is
Okay.
where. Okay.
Wait. I'm sorry. I have one more quick point, and I am a bit passionate on this issue. But one more quick point. If I think there's a distinction between Islam and some of the other religions, I think it is this one thing. And I actually went to a mosque not too long ago and talked to a guy there. I talked to the leader. I forget the name of their religious leaders, but I talked to this.
Imams.
Probably, I think it's an imam. I talked to this gentleman about Islam because I wanted to learn a bit more about it from an insider's perspective. And he said something that was striking to me. He said, "I'm sure you're familiar with the quote from the Bible where Jesus says, 'Give unto Caesar Caesar's due,' which generally, I mean, of course, you can go. Then this is the question. This goes into biblical criticism, which I don't want to go too deeply into. But generally speaking, people interpret that line as meaning, politics is here, religion is here. That they're not one and the same. And this guy said to me, Islam or Muslims don't believe Jesus said, or don't believe in that idea. That they believe that religion and politics are not exactly one and the same, but are heavily, heavily connected. And I think that is the real distinction between Islam and perhaps Judaism and Christianity. And I think that part of Islam needs to be moderated, if not maybe disposed of completely. But again, I'm not advocating complete eradication of Islam. I'm not advocating any discrimination against Muslims. So
Okay, so the main thing that I wanted. Okay, so I was going to say two things. One, yeah, I'm not against empowering the more moderate Muslims to take over their religion and essentially make it so it's not remotely violent and they don't promote terrorism. Like that's more of an empirical question of like, what do you think is the most effective way to resolve this crisis and all these religious domination going on in the Middle East and stuff like that, and how ideology plays into that. I feel like there's probably a solid answer that's kind of unquestionable if you really gamed it out. Now, I kind of drew, what's the word for it? I'm familiar with the New Atheists. I don't find them particularly, I don't find their explanations of things satisfying at all. And this is me being a person who does not have belief. I think their arguments against religion as a whole are kind of misleading. Like Christopher Hitchens, a lot of his work, I think he blames a lot of things on religion that are not religion's faults. He will take things that are take place in a religious structure or wars that are like religious based and then imply that the status quo would have been different if they just hypothetically weren't religious. There are things like that where I don't think religion is the cause. I think religion is related. But I find that they kind of just misread it in a way that is unsatisfying and kind of first level, which is why I'm not super into them. But once again, I have the God Delusion on hold right now. I'm about to listen to that audiobook in like a week, so we'll check that out. But yeah, I'm familiar with a lot of Sam Harris's stuff, and it's like you could read the text literally, and then you could say this clearly is saying you should kill somebody. That's clearly bad. But a lot of people start with religious foundations and they do a lot of good in the world. And I wouldn't say that the world would be a better place historically if there was no religion. I think there are a lot of benefits of religion that have led into a lot of Western civilization that are really good. So I would probably disagree with you on that, but that's more than we have time for because we're already at like the 40-something minute mark. So we should probably jump into talking about the IDW a bit. And you can have a last thought because I'm not the monopolizer of last words on every issue.
I'm sure we'll dive into this new atheist, dive into the new atheist movement and questions of religion more in further episodes because when is religion not a topic of discussion? When is it not important? I will just say before you move on, I sense I could be wrong, but I sense that your argument you just gave sounds very similar to the Jordan Peterson argument in favor of faith. And as I told you, I think before, I agree with Peterson maybe 50% of the time. But on religion, I think he's dead wrong. And I do believe that, as I said, religion does cause a lot of evil that would not exist without it. But again, human nature is fallible, and I think religion is just it's something that has to be dealt with, and I think can be dealt with in better or worse ways. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so we'll agree to completely disagree on that one for now, and then we'll tackle that probably the next time we find something noteworthy about Jordan Peterson. Maybe we'll launch that we'll springboard off that to a bigger discussion. So the video we were watching it's from the roaming millennial Lori Chen. I'm actually a fan of hers. I started listening to her maybe 6 or 7 months ago, her podcast. She recently rebranded to have a show. She does a little longer form show. She has a 15-minute YouTube video up called Dave Rubin and the IDW, Actually Conservatives, Partisans. And she kind of talks about how there was this Gillette magazine article that criticized the IDW, criticized Dave Rubin a lot. And it pretty much said they're kind of all the same because all they do is they bash on SJWs, and that's really their identity as a group. This is what their tribe is really for. And yeah, so I'm a big fan of a lot of people in that circle. I listen to Joe Rogan, I listen to Shapiro, I listen to all the crossover in there. I listen to Sam Harris. I listen to whenever Brett and Eric Weinstein are put on a podcast. I love that stuff. I love Jonathan Haidt, all those guys. I've read a lot of their work. I've listened to a lot of their stuff. And I forgot Shermer and Steven Pinker and even more. So I find when they're called kind of homogenous, I think it's funny when they get branded conservatives, because in general, they're usually center left or left on the average. But they are generally all anti-SJW. So if you felt the need to take the group and characterize them off one characteristic, that is the one thing they're all in favor of. They're all in favor of free speech, and they're all against the general SJW anti-free speech sentiment that comes with, silencing people with, say, like trigger warnings and microaggressions and worrying about that. And you can see that if you read Jonathan Haidt's new book with, oh my God, I cannot remember his co-author's name. I feel bad about that because he's also an interesting figure. The Coddling of the American Mind is a great book, and it kind of is just attacking the social justice culture for about 300 pages. So on one hand, that's how you could characterize them, but I don't think you should, because they're all very different people. If you read into their work, they all have very different views, and I don't think they are that simple. This is just the human need to categorize things, and I think it's ridiculous to even bother with them. But I don't know if you had stronger thoughts.
As I mentioned before, there was this one particular topic that I wanted to tackle with this this YouTube video and the article that she linked to. I think I generally agree with you there. I think I don't think we can categorize the intellectual dark web as right or right wing or alt right, or this is just another way to smear people. Get over it. That's really all I have to say about that. What I actually really wanted to talk about, and I think we'll completely disagree about this. So maybe that's good. Maybe that'll give us a good remainder of 10 minutes or so of content. And that is over Dave Rubin.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. This was one of the first things we ever talked about, because I knew he had said something critical of Dave Rubin, and I was like, what? I kind of like his show. Yeah, this will be fun. Go ahead.
So, what Laura Chen mentioned in her video was that she and I think actually this is one of the first videos I've seen of her, so I'm not very familiar with her work, but from what I can tell, I guess she's a moderate conservative. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And she was saying that Dave Rubin was not a conservative. And I find that idea to be completely incorrect. And I know he several people say this, but especially he perpetuates this. I'm not a conservative. This is the left's tactic to smear me. I am just the same old, liberal that I've always been. I think, he made a PragerU video, why I left the left, why the left is no longer liberal. Everybody's familiar with, or most people are probably familiar with his work. I don't have to go into that. But I think he fundamentally is a right-wing libertarian. And I wish he would just admit that, because he seems afraid to admit that. And I don't know why. Yes, he says, "Oh, I'm pro-gay marriage. I'm pro-choice." Okay, so we're supposed to understand your entire political ideology based on those two issues. I don't buy that. If you watch his, I'm almost done. I promise.
Yeah.
If you watch his, and I feel like I'm taking a bit of a bit too strident of a tone, so I don't mean to. If you watch his show, again, I think he's pretty right-wing libertarian. He when he was on Joe Rogan, he mentioned how if that a cake, if someone has a store where they bake cakes for people, that they should be allowed to refuse service to a gay person. It says in the chart that Sam Harris tweeted out that he is a member of the Republican, that he's a registered Republican. Now I'm just going on that chart. Maybe that chart is completely incorrect. I guess I'll let you jump in here.
Okay. So I think we are quickly approaching a argument based on semantics. Semantic arguments happen a lot. And yeah, this is a problem with the left-right spectrum, the conservative to liberal spectrum, and it's annoying and it's awful. So Dave Rubin strikes me as not right-wing in the sense that he's only right-wing if you associate the term right-wing with small government, right? So if you say right-wing equals small government, then yeah, he's obviously right-wing. But people would call, the alt-right, the furthest people on the right, and the alt-right aren't known for being small government. They're known for being vindictive racists, or, really hardcore traditionalists are considered far-right. And hardcore traditionalists aren't usually actually that small government of the Republicans. The Republicans are most small government are really closer to libertarians. I would consider myself a libertarian. I may consider myself a right-leaning libertarian, but I don't really like that distinction. The difference between me and Dave Rubin is I'm more libertarian than he is, because he's actually okay with regulation sometimes, which in a weird way I think makes him further right, because it makes him more like a Republican than a libertarian, because Republicans are usually okay with some of it. But he's pro-choice. Pro-choice is a very, very left-wing value. When he takes stances that are beyond questions of should the government allow it, he sounds like a person who went to Berkeley in the 80s, which is why I think he grabs onto the term classical liberal so much, is because he thinks of that time when people were like, I can say whatever I want, I can protest whatever I want, I can do this, I can do that, that's my freedom to do it, even though they were Democrats. So he really identifies with that era Democrat, but he knows that that's not what the Democrats are anymore. And I think he's disappointed by that. So he doesn't want to say he's a Republican, because he's really only a Republican in the sense that he's for small government. That's his big turn, but he's still pro-choice. So I would almost call him a left-leaning libertarian, just because being pro-choice is such a huge issue. But here's the thing. You keep associating left with big government things. That's why when I call him a left-leaning libertarian, you don't like that, right? Because you associate the left with people who want to do certain restrictions on businesses, or you even associate the left with things like forcing a baker to make a cake for somebody against his religious conviction. But people in Berkeley in the 80s would probably be okay with that, because that's freedom of expression of religion, just through your business practices. I don't see why that is intrinsically right-wing, except for it's a right-wing guy who's using his rights. It's like if you were defending the free speech of a right-winger, that would be a liberal value, even though it's a right-winger who wants to talk. So I kind of reject calling him a right-wing libertarian when he's pro-choice, and he's only right-wing in the sense that he's a libertarian. And I think you're falsely classifying libertarians as inherently right-wing, because I think the scale is badly designed. I think it's a semantic disagreement.
So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
No, I don't think this is a semantics agreement. I think I think that Dave Rubin is. I'm trying to put this in a diplomatic way. I think he's a bit confused, honestly.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
He originally, and by confused, I'm not saying, oh, he changed his mind. I don't mean that. But by that, I'm sorry.
I think he's changed his mind a little bit on things over the last few years. I don't think he fully knows where he stands on a lot of things, and he's admitted that a few times on air.
Well, yeah, because I think he was basically I get, you use the term SJW. That's basically what he was for a time. He was on the Young Turks, and he admits himself that he was a regressive. So, no, I don't think that libertarians are inherently right wing. I think you can have left wing libertarians and right wing libertarians. And by that I'm not referring to the party. I'm referring to libertarianism generally. I would consider myself a left-wing libertarian. Again, not with the party when we're talking general definitions. And another thing that I wanted to touch on when it comes to Dave Rubin, I think I also really dislike, and we've also talked about this, I really dislike his interview style. He has a very hands-off interview style. He just lets the guests, he'll ask a few questions, but he generally just lets the guests talk for an hour or so, or however long the show is, without really, pushing the guest much. And then if he is not a right-wing libertarian, if he is certainly a left-wing libertarian, then he certainly doesn't show it. Because I wish that he would push his guests more, ask more hard-hitting questions, because I think he's trying to be a journalist, but on the other hand, he says, no, I'm not a journalist. I'm just some guy, talking to people. And once again, I think he's confused. He's not quite sure what he wants to be. Does he want to be in the game, or does he want to be an observer of the game? And he's trying to be both, when I don't think you can be both, honestly. One more thing. He says, to illustrate this, not constantly, but he quite frequently brings up Larry King. He says, Larry King is my mentor. He is what he is who I look up to. He is who I emulate in terms of being an interviewer. But I just think that's a incorrect comparison, because Larry King didn't have a political agenda. Dave Rubin clearly does have a political agenda. He might be a bit confused as to what it is, but he clearly has this, he clearly is, but believes that, that SJW culture is running amok. And I probably agree with that. But I don't think, to summarize, I guess, I feel as if he's putting on a bit of a pose, and I really distaste that.
Okay, so I'm going to point out real quick what I agree with you on and what I disagree with you on. I agree with you that he isn't accurately doing what Larry King does. I disagree with you on how much that matters, because he says that, and I'm like, okay, whatever. Okay, you're not doing that. You say you wish you did. You're not. Okay, that sucks. I don't care. Everything else you said, I also disagree with completely. I like to frame it like that. I thought that was funny. I prepped that in my head when I was listening through. I like his hands-off approach, because it lets me listen to what the guests have to say. I hate when interviewers push back and make stupid points. And a lot of interviewers push back and they make dumb points. And I'm like, wow, you're wasting time. I want to hear what this guy has to say. Two, I think pretty much anybody who regularly listens to the Rubin Report knows what they're getting from Dave Rubin. I don't think anybody's surprised or thinks he's misleading them into what he believes. I don't think he knows what he believes a lot of the time. I think he leans libertarian. If you want to say he's a right-wing or left-wing libertarian, it depends how you want to define that. I think like you can call him a left-wing libertarian because he's for small government and he's pro-choice. You can call him a right-wing libertarian because him being for small government means he's against all these kinds of left-wing policies and he's against social justice warriors. But that's all a characterization thing, and I don't think it's that important of a distinction to make. And he brings people on his show that are moderate left all the time. He's had all the IDW guys on his show who are center left. He's had the Weinsteins on his show. He's had Nicholas Christakis, who went on Joe Rogan right before Dave Rubin. And I listened to that Joe Rogan episode and had to turn it off because Nicholas Christakis was just crapping on libertarianism with these terrible arguments, and Joe Rogan's just sitting there like agreeing with him. I'm like, I can't listen to this. Joe Rogan's just, whatever. And then, but then that guy who just essentially degraded Dave Rubin's views goes on the Rubin Report, and then he gets to talk about his work. His work's mostly not political, but he's a left-leaning guy and he's open about it. And that's a thing. I appreciate it. The only way he's similar to Larry King is he's willing to have people who talk about a ton of different things on his show. Because he'll have somebody who's mostly focused on evolutionary biology on his show, and then he'll have people who are like, hardcore anti-immigration on the right. But you're right, he doesn't push back on anybody. I'm okay with that. I don't think he's doing it maliciously. I think he's a good-intentioned guy. He's just kind of hanging out doing his thing. I don't think there's any problem with that. It doesn't irritate me that he is simultaneously a journalist and a commentator. I don't think there's an issue there as long as you know how they're biased. That's like when I watch CNN. I know they're kind of both. They're going to tell me the news and they're going to tell me it with a left slant. I know the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, is going to tell me the news and tell me his right-wing take on it. I'm fine with him doing both because I know where their biases are. Dave Rubin just falls into the same category. We're me taking the 2 minutes to respond to that because I really needed to. I was going to try not to, but I really needed to. It's putting us over time. So we do need to wrap up. I'm glad we got to have some back and forth. That was good. We haven't had to have... there have been a couple episodes where we were severely lacking this, and we got to do it a couple times. So that's good. Hopefully we could find something that's related to Jordan Peterson to talk about next week, and then maybe we can dig a little bit deeper onto that. But yeah, do you want to have a last comment before we sign off? Maybe tell everybody where they can find your videos, stuff like that.
Sure, you can find me on YouTube. Just type in The Anti-Philosopher. I've been a bit lackluster in posting videos there, but I'm going to try to put up more content. Just if you enjoy the show, come back every week to listen to us. We try to post content on every Tuesday or Wednesday probably, because we were normally recorded on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Evening. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud.
We are on Spotify and Stitcher now. And we might be on iHeartRadio. I'm not sure. I have not checked that email address to see if we are, but we might be. So that's cool.
Alrighty. So you have plenty of places to find us, and we'll keep on putting out content.
Yeah, so thank you guys for listening with us for about an hour there. So signing off, Matt and Matthew.